Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 160 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we're going to continue on our series, So You Want to Get Into Long Range Shooting. And in this one, as promised, we're going to be talking about what we would choose and what we think would be good choices and how we came about with these choices when it comes to selecting a factory rifle to get into marksmanship or to train and become efficient and effective shooters, whether it's precision shooting up close or long range shooting at distance. So that'd be a great podcast. I brought Richard back on with his list, and I actually gave him a warning. I sent him a text last night.
Yeah, last night.
I said, hey, here's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I'll give you some time. And I didn't share my list and how I made it. So you're going to hear some honest opinions on what we really think would be good choices for you if you decide that, you know, when we did the last podcast, it was factory or custom, and we talked about the parameters and trying to make decisions with that. And in this one, we're going to give you some choices when it comes to factory rifles and what we would choose. So without further ado, here we go. All right, before we get started, I do want to say thank you to a couple sponsors. We want to say thank you to TriggerTech. TriggerTech is a maker of fine triggers. We talk about them all the time, about easy to install, safe triggers, easy to adjust. For all of these reasons, they are the only triggers that we put in our custom rifles here, and we have been doing that way for years. So a great upgrade to your rifle, factory or custom, stop over to triggertech.com. That's triggertech.com, and see all the selections they have available today. We'd also like to thank Krieger Barrels. Krieger is the maker of fine cut rifle barrels. They are a family-owned and operated business out of the great state of Wisconsin. They make probably what I would consider the best when it comes to cut rifle barrels. So if you want the best, they have a new program called Krieger Direct where you can stop over and get your barrel and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So if you want the best and you need it now, stop over to Krieger Barrels. That's KriegerBarrels.com, KriegerBarrels.com today. All right, so be a nice morning here. We're sitting in the podcasting room. They're working on the lathes and mills today, getting everything leveled and powered up. That's always pretty exciting. But I wanted to take some time to talk with you about the options when it comes to factory rifles and some opinions of what we have seen and used and liked over the years. Now, one of the prerequisites that I think that maybe we are able to speak on this topic without being, opinionated without any experience. We have been shooting for decades. We've been competing decades prior. And we have been teaching the shooting school here going on 13, 14 years. And even before that, spent lots of time with people at matches and events. And so I'm not going to say we've seen it all, but we've seen a lot of rifles and talked to a lot of owners and a lot of owners that were shooters. So they weren't just the new guy that grabbed a rifle and went to the range and was complaining about something. A lot of these guys could run a rifle and they could pick them out in a hurry too. For us was our experiences at the shooting school, and I think here's where people get into trouble when they select a factory rifle, is they take the opinion of the kid at the counter. And there's nothing wrong with, everybody that works at the outdoor industry or works in a sporting goods store, but not all of them are shooters. And a lot of times they're incentivized to sell different brands at different times of the year as well. So you're going in as a new shooter, and they're saying, well, here, this is what we hear is the most popular, and they hand you this rifle, and, they're selling it to you, but they have no experience with the rifle. They've never really shot it at distance. They certainly don't have hundreds, if not thousands, of rounds down the barrel to give you an honest evaluation. Where we're lucky is we get to watch shooters come in all the time and put hundreds of rounds through the gun. And we get to watch how they track, how they shoot. We get to shoot them often. And we just got that experience of watching them here at the school and trying to wring everything out of them. So I want to give you, the listener, the list that we would use if we were forced to say, hey, you guys have to shoot a factory rifle in a match or on a hunt. We're limited and this is the requirements to participate, whatever it might be, what we would choose and from the experiences that we have on. And we'll go over the parameters and how we chose them. So I'll let Richard talk a little bit about, as he shared with you his experience about how he went into custom rifle. And he went into custom right out of the gate. But he also has some experience with some factory rifles, and I gave him a little bit of heads up. I'd like to hear how he decided on his top 3 list. Like, what parameters was he thinking in his head that was important to him, and how he's sort of laying out his list as how he would pick, here's my top 3, and here's how I would decide between the 3.
Okay, Jamie. So, oh, you poor listeners, I feel sorry for you. No, this is really, really hard. And when I was thinking about this last night, I was also thinking about, my friends in the UK who get to choose, and they get to choose basically only one, right? Because it's much more difficult to add a firearm onto your firearm certificate in the UK. If you guys know how that all works, it's a royal pain in the whatsit, and you have to justify why you need it. So you only have one, and then there's different calibers that you can use on different animals. So that's a huge thing. Anyway, so if you made it, then the point where you only had you could only have one, which if you're new getting into long range shooting for whatever is your destination, whether it's competition or hunting, you're only going to buy one at a time. And so then you start running into the age-old question of, things like barrel length and caliber and so on and so forth. So not to go off topic immediately in the first 1 minute of talking, but those were also things that I was thinking about while I was, making my picks. Now, my experience from shooting competition and so on and so forth, limited hunting. I don't do a lot of hunting. I'm not really into that too much, a little bit, but not too much. Mostly competition and then working at the school is adjustability. So what I'm interested in is length of pull adjustments. Can you do it? Is it relatively easy? Can you get the range that you need? Cheek piece is an absolute must in my mind. You've got to have an adjustable cheek piece. So your traditional hunting stock, I'm not a stock guy, I think you guys know that already, is therefore limited straight away, because you end up having to do something custom on the rifle straight away almost to get cheek piece. Weight is a huge consideration. I think for a new shooter, you've got to be looking, north of 12 pounds, which, can be a little bit of a constraint if your final destination is hunting. That can be one area where you get pushed into this ultra lightweight world, which if you're a new shooter then causes problems in learning fundamentals and learning how to shoot properly and so on and so forth. Lastly, got to have a box magazine. It's just so much more convenient. Just don't forget it when you go hunting. And then barrels need to be threaded, because I think in most states in the US where you're allowed, you're going to buy a suppressor. And I believe that you'll kick yourself if you don't have a suppressor. Now, modern convenience is I'm predisposed to carbon barrels these days just because none of us are getting any younger, and it's good to be able to manage the weight of the overall rifle. And so you can put weight where you want it. And the main reason for choosing carbon barrels in my mind is that you can go for a slightly longer barrel and keep the weight down. So you don't have to go 16-inch barrel, because, if you go with a suppressor, you're going to add on, 5 to 9 inches depending on your suppressor of choice. And so you don't want a barrel that's 26 inches long and then put a 9-inch suppressor on it. It'll be so unwieldy, you'll hate yourself for that as well. So those were my real considerations. I mean, triggers, you can swap a trigger out in no time whatsoever, so that's no big deal. My experience with actions is I've never really found a bad one, so I'm not really that much concerned about it. I mean, I've shot everything from World War I rifles all the way through to the latest modern stuff, I guess, along the way. So I'm pretty much happy with all the actions. I've never had one jam up on me so bad that I couldn't use it. So yeah, those were the constraints that was the bubble I was thinking in when I was thinking about what I would choose and how I would make a choice.
I think that's awesome. Like, taking in consideration the stock and fitment, all these other things that are just as important as the brand, because it's really going to narrow down the field, especially with factory rifles. It's getting better.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for factory rifles, that's a huge deal. And I agree. You'll hear some people really say that internal boxes, like an ADL or BDL floor plate, they're quieter, they feed and function better. And for me, I'm with Richard. I think, that you got polymer mags if you want quiet now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even carbon fiber magazines. Yeah. So it's just getting them fit properly. I mean, they're stamped metal, so sometimes you actually have to modify the magazines to get them to run perfect, and the little tricks to the trade. One of the things that Richard had said about the receivers, and we're going to do one of these, we're going to follow up and we're going to talk about custom rifles a little bit, and we're probably going to continue on and talk about suppressors and brakes, some options, and even safety part. Some of the things that with factory rifles you'll get away from that you have to watch that you'll find in custom rifles, and Richard's right, on most of your factory rifles are probably going to run really well. On the custom side, though, there's a couple of things you have to consider that's beyond the factory realm. So, like, for example, we got a custom rifle here that when we first got it out of the box and worked the bolt, it was like trying to slide two stuck parts together. Without saying the name of the receiver, but now Richard cleaned it up and it ran great afterwards. But do you remember that rifle?
Yeah, I do. I do. I was very surprised, actually. I couldn't work out what was going on with it. It was like it was cleaned with a very, very heavy type of grease. I can't even describe it. It was literally like a glue, almost.
It was sticking,
and it wasn't like we were cold in here. It was it was probably 70 degrees in here, and it was a glue that if it was on two surfaces, the friction rate on it was absolutely incredible. And I was surprised, and I just cleaned it all down with alcohol and then reapplied some TW25, and suddenly it was like, wow, this is a completely different, different action.
What had happened was, and I didn't talk to Richard much afterwards because we had gotten off on some other projects, both going in different directions here, but stainless on stainless and sort of dry. And so the materials that the bolts are made from and the receivers made from, like in the case that Richard had this rifle, and I got it out of the box, is they didn't keep in mind that when they make some of these things that you have to learn about when you go custom, that they all look the same from the outside, but in this case it was a stainless bolt, stainless receiver, and when those two materials are semi-dry, they have this tack that they just want to stick to each other, and it makes running the bolts awful. Now when you clean them and lube them, they run great.
Yeah, it was fine. And it's funny because my Remington 700, effectively my match rifle, is stainless, and I've never experienced that before. Mm-hmm. But it's, I have a sleeved bolt, and I always keep it lubed anyway.
Yep, and when they do the sleeves get hardened from the very fine machining, and then they're usually oblong, so they're a little bit longer on one side than on the other. So as the bolt's running back and forth, you got more clearance, and they won't tighten up so they're almost like egg-shaped, I guess you would say, something like that. Yep. So, there's things to think about when you get into custom that when you go factory, you don't have to. The people that are building factory rifles, they know that these things could get run dry. You're out in the rain, you forget to wipe everything down. I mean, so they're really mindful of both the coatings, clearances, the things to keep it running when you neglect your rifle.
Yeah, so look, there's the thing, right? So when I got my rifle built by Greg Tannell, Grey Tan Rifles, there was so much I didn't know about rifles that I just went straight to what I found out was one of the best builders in North America, and he built the rifle for me. And because I didn't know what I didn't know, it was easier for me to get from A to B just going straight to a great build. I didn't know Jamie in those days, and Jamie's worked on that rifle subsequently, put 2 barrels on it, and it still shoots absolutely amazing. But I was recommended Greg Tannell. They're like, oh, just send all the stuff over to this guy. You send him a pile of money, and he'll make the best rifle out of that pile of stuff that you could possibly have. And guess what? He did. And so I didn't have to think about anything. I just collected all the bits together, put them in a box, and sent them over to him. And it came back as a fantastic rifle.
Came back as built by a professional.
Built by a very professional
Greg
guy,
Tannell, Gordy Gritters. You've got a ton of really high-end custom builders that are just gurus.
Yep.
And I've talked to Greg many times. Actually, there's a lot of stuff that we talked about when it comes to machining and truing receivers and Gordy Gritters and sleeving, all the things that we've all done. They truly are masters. And the fact that you actually got a rifle built by him back then was amazing because his backlog has got to be
I know. I mean,
crazy.
I had to wait for it. I had to wait like 9 months or something. Right. But that didn't seem that bad at the time.
No, it's not. Know? He's probably... But the thing is, he knows how to take your parts. You did do research. And you said the keywords. You found the best person you could find.
That's right.
Period.
Yeah.
And sent him the parts and let him do his master part. Yeah. Right. He's a master builder.
So just quickly while we're talking about that, so it was a stainless steel Remington. It was a Remington 5R when I bought it from the gun store, And then it was a brand new Krieger MTU barrel, the Remington Action, Accuracy International stock, a dual trigger. Did I forget anything? No, that was it. I sent him 2 barrels. So he did 2 barrels at the same time, which is the best way to do it, by the way, if you're going to go that route. And it took 9 months, and then the baby was born, and it came back to me, and it shot lights out. It was fantastic shooting rifle.
Oh, and not to get off topic, because we want to stay on the factory rifle, but he did bet it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he betted it because he said that when he was checking the receiver, he said it was slightly twisted. The receiver, which, slightly twisted. I'm not surprised.
You're probably thinking, like, how in the hell is a receiver twisted?
I have no idea, because it was basically a brand new rifle, but I'm just like, hey, whatever,
Yeah.
And now Jamie was telling me I'm a betting fool these days. I just tell people, like, come on, it's a couple $100, just bet it.
I'm waiting to find my microphone bedded into the thing that holds it on. He's betting everything.
It will cut the vibration down for you.
There we go. And he's doing a good job. And it's funny because it's a learned art.
Yeah.
If you do it exactly right, you wind up with a fantastic shooting rifle that will just repeat. But there's a little bit of art and craft to it, isn't it? It's fun once you know how to do it.
After the podcast, I got to tell you a story from last week, because I betted something else at home last week.
Oh, no. Yeah, it's funny when you learn how to do this also. People used to bed rails. You can bed rails. You can actually bed scope rings for issues like that. These are things that, like, in the 80s and 90s and 2000s,
Yep.
solving problems of less than perfect parts. So let's go back to the
main question.
Yeah. So factory or custom was led up to this, and I'm going to let you go first to give your list and your criteria of, like, okay, here's the 3. And I thought about, I'm not going to tell you how I did it, so I don't ruin it for you, or so I don't twist what you're thinking. But your top 3 and how you would choose between them, the scenarios that you would pick one over the other.
Right. So basically, I've only got 2. That's my main answer, is I've only got 2. But that's okay, because 2's better than 1. So I think, having had experience through the school here, you will not be surprised, but I'm very predisposed to Tikkas. If the person is thinking to going down the hunting route, they have one in their range for you. And you can go ultra lightweight, or you can go something a little bit heavier. And if you're going to go down the PRS route, you've got 2 choices there as well within the Tikka range. So it meets either one of those 3. They all can meet my criteria of adjustability, cheek weld, decent length barrel, box magazine, adjustable stock. So you've got plenty of choices there, and the prices are right for entry as well. So it leaves a lot of money on the table to buy a good set of rings and a proper scope. So if you're going to go down the hunting route, but you still got to learn how to shoot, I think they have I think they call it a UBR, which is a stock. It's not a chassis, it's a stock. So it's not a traditional hunting stock. It's a modified stock that allows you to, make appropriate adjustments, more vertical pistol grip, for instance, so on and so forth. But that, I think, gives you what you need. It gives you the basis for learning how to shoot. They're definitely accurate enough. My experience with them, I had a 243 compact hunting rifle a few years ago. I'm big into 243, and it was good. It was the only problem I think that you run into there is finding the ideal caliber in a standard off-the-shelf rifle. And there is a little bit of a price that you pay there when you're learning to shoot, because you're probably going to go with either 6.5 or 308. Common calibers work for hunting, so on and so forth. If you're an East Coast person, you can pick 243 or 6.5. If you're a West Coast person, someone's going to hate me for this, but you can pick 6.5 or 308. And that will, I think, I don't know how, I don't have any experience at all of going out west and shooting anything, but I would think the 308 will do the job on for a lot of things that you're going to shoot at for hunting. So you've got good choices there. So my first port of call would be Tikka. My second port of call would be Bergara. Now, I've shot 2 Bergaras since I've seen them at the school. None of them have gone through the school. They've always been rifles that people have brought alongside rifles that have been at the school. So I've shot 2 Bergaras. I think the build quality is fantastic. They look very much like a Tikka build quality. They both shot great. The actions were smooth, and they met all the Richard criteria for adjustability and, for a hunting rifle for sure. So again, popular calibers, right? Your 6.5, your 308, and a few others thrown in there. I think the one thing that I've learned over the years at the shooting school is that people do better learning how to shoot on a lighter caliber. For instance, I just built a 223 using an Ace system rifle because I've got a couple of youngsters I got to teach how to shoot properly. Like my son doesn't know how to shoot properly. He thinks it's all about the mass expenditure of ammunition rather than accuracy. So I got to, teach him that. And my daughter's boyfriend is also very interested. I actually just took him out last week and put him through his paces a little bit with the 223. And he loves shooting 223 suppressed. And he was getting into it. He was asking lots of questions, and so it was a good teaching rifle. And he has a hunting rifle that came from uncle or grandfather, whatever. It's 30-06, and he fired the first round and looked at me and goes, "Oh, that's wonderful to shoot," or words to that effect. And I'm like, "Yeah, this is all about learning how to shoot. It's not bigger boomer." And he's like, "Oh, I kind of get it. It's easy to shoot, and you can think about other stuff." I'm like, "That's exactly why you do it." So the problem with some of these factory rifles is the ones that you probably want to go into, you can't get the lighter calibers. And if you run into this situation where you're going to end up with a second rifle. So I think one of the things for folks is that if they're going to go competition and then do some hunting, you might have to take a little bit of pain. And in that case, I'd probably go 6.5 because 6.5 is easier to shoot than 308.
Right.
So there you go. So I think I still say Tikka's my number one. And then the Bergara, I don't have a whole lot of experience with it, but from what I've seen, really, really nice. Really nice rifles. And I would, if I didn't just buy another rifle that's ultimately going to be my son's rifle, I would probably look at a Bergara or a Tikka for him. So he's got his one hunting rifle that he'll need.
Excellent. I like the list, and I actually like the pre-thought of thinking about not just the rifle or even the brand, but hey, who has adjustability? Like, who has this? Who has that? So when I was thinking through the list, the first one I was thinking of was Tikka.
Yeah.
For all the reasons Richard was talking about, from the ultra lightweight, the T3 light, which is a fantastic and a super light kicking caliber. We just had our signs put up yesterday. One of the gentlemen that come in just bought a Tikka T3 light in 300 WSM.
Ooh,
yeah, he was like 6'5", but he said it was kicking the living daylights out of him. I can't use the words he was using on air, but obviously he was not enjoying it. He was asking like, hey, where can I get like those giant limb saver pads and all these things? The other reason I chose Tikka, besides the adjustability and besides the quality, they have a good trigger, but I think Tikka is the new Remington 700 in the fact that as you grow as a shooter and you decide that, hey, I want to take this to the next level, you're going to see a lot of aftermarket stocks that are supporting it, as well as switch barrels. Or I don't want to say pre-fits because I always cringe when I hear that. We were just talking with a famous action maker yesterday from here in Pennsylvania, and he still cringes with that because pre-fit works in some scenarios, but you have this gray area on both ends of the manufacturing.
Yeah, so jumping into the barrel discussion there, one of the thoughts that I was around Savage, because I had a great experience with Savage with a rifle that shot really, really well, but it was the Macmillan stock. I forget which one it was.
I think they offered it in the A5.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was bedded into that stock, and that rifle shot great. And of course, with the Savage, with the barrel nut, you can basically fit your own barrels onto it, and you can do some tuning there if you like as well. So that was another one of that was in the back of my mind, but I haven't had any experience with a modern Savage.
And I'm glad he brought that up too, because two things. So I'll go back to the Tikka. There's not much I can add to what Richard said to it other than I think they have the better quality action. Of course, European manufacturing in some ways really has taken, I mean, let's just face it, they make world-class stuff. We make world-class stuff as well, but in manufacturing, Seiko really has it up on the notch. But I think for me, besides all the points that Richard brought up that I don't want to repeat, he's got it right, is the fact that you'll see more aftermarket support now. You can change the barrels, and there are pre-fits on the market, and it's something that we've been talking about here with the ACE system, is eventually designing an ACE system for the Tikka, because we think the platform's worth it. We
Absolutely.
think somebody that has a really good shooting Tikka, we think the receiver's worthy enough of that look. My second choice was the Ruger Precision Rifle, and I'm saying that because I think for the newer shooter, it's fully adjustable, American made. I still think they're sub-minute of angle. We've seen some come through the school that just destroy. I mean, they were great shooting rifles, and we've had others come through that were average, not terrible, but certainly not at the level I would hope that they would all be at. So you still have that small chance of getting one that just doesn't perform the way you want it to, but that's the one nice thing about a factory rifle is you can send it back and get another one.
That's right.
But I wanted to throw Ruger out there. I think they do a great job with it, and it's really heavily supported aftermarket-wise, even if you want to upgrade some stuff like barrels and so on. My third choice was going to be a Savage, like Richard was talking about. The only thing and the reason I hesitate on it is because I am not a fan of the barrel nut system.
Right.
I've had good experiences with, I had a 308 Savage,
Yep.
and I had a 22-250 Savage when I was younger. But there's a vulnerability issue with how the barrel nut works, is how it's sort of supporting the barrel being pulled against two threads opposite. There's no shoulder. It's free floating between two small sets of threads, just tensioning or stretching and holding it. The pre-fits, because of the lack of the shoulder, we just had a customer that had, or a friend of his, put together a pre-fit Savage. And evidently there was either dirt, debris, something on the bolt face. He ended up almost one full rotation out on the threads when he finally locked it in by accident or design, and was splitting cases. So a locked up shoulder eliminates the human error part of it, or making a mistake, which in that case, could be dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I would put that into that person didn't know what they didn't know when they were putting it together. And
That's right.
They just didn't know the minutest piece of stuff.
Well,
could make a difference.
The customer had said, it was his friend, a customer's friend had said that, of course, he would think that maybe something got in there. But if you're going to do one of the reasons why I didn't put Savage on the list was just for like what Richard was talking about, and the fact that if you do aftermarket stuff, you have a little bit extra learning curve to make sure that you do the pre-fit properly. You can get in trouble because you can make the headspace any size you want. And again, I actually prefer a shouldered barrel, but that's just me. I've shot Savages, and I've had great luck with them. I've had some good shooting ones. Right. But there's that vulnerability process there that just, I would say, if I was going to invest more money in a rifle, it wouldn't be a Savage.
Yeah. It's kind of like it opens the door to that tuning area, but the person that's buying it and doing it probably isn't quite ready for it yet.
Right.
Which is a dangerous combination when it comes to firearms.
Which is what we're talking about, new shooters too.
Exactly.
Yeah, so pre-fits, I prefer shouldered barrel, especially for newer shooters. And factory Savages, I think, almost made the list, but I would say for me personally, I put Tikka first, and then I put Ruger Precision second. And then my third one was the Bagheera that Richard brought up. And the only reason I kept it third is I just haven't seen enough of them or shot enough of them, like Richard said here at the school.
I've only shot two of them myself. So
be curious to see where they would go and how they come along. Now, before we wrap up the podcast, I want to talk about a couple of things that I wouldn't pick and some reasons why, and then I'll let Richard chime in.
I wouldn't pick an AR.
It's exactly right. He's reading my mind. ARs are great rifles. They really are. And you can get some that can shoot. People would argue that they can make a quarter-minute AR. Is it possible? I've never personally seen one.
Whenever I've gotten an AR out, and I own, not that many, but I own a couple of ARs, and I have one set up as a long rifle and one set up as a carbine. And even the longer rifle that I have, if I get a 1-inch group out of it at 100 yards, I'm a happy camper.
We struggled like crazy. We were varmint hunters, and we tried to get one that we were going to do long-range varmint hunting with the AR, and we went through 3 or 4 of them, just tons of reloading, and I mean, it was just, we finally got one to shoot. It would probably hover right around a half to 3/4, and then eventually we got the load settling just below half. And it was the best one I ever had. But
And then 20 rounds later, it wouldn't do it anymore.
yeah. So there's weaknesses in the system, but I think for new shooters, there's also a lot of complexity. And even the single shot versions where you rack and the carrier stays down until you pull it, I would probably avoid those for a new shooter for many different reasons. Besides them not being as accurate as you want them to be, I think you have a learning curve if you're not familiar, if you haven't served in the military, you had no experience with them. You can get yourself in harm's way with one in a hurry unless you have somebody that really knows what they're doing, teach you a little bit about it. Richard had an experience at a range. I don't know if we talked about it here in the podcast or not, but at a public range, not at our range, at a public range. But if you want to tell the story real quick, this is common. People hand the AR across the counter. Yep. The kid gives you a little breakdown on how everything works, and off you go. And here's what can happen.
I think we've seen a lot in the last couple of years with new shooters coming into I'll say the sport or the hobby, whatever you want to look at it like. And I was at my local club, and there was a guy there, and he was kind of sheepishly looking around, and I was the only other person there. And I'm like, "Hey, is everything okay?" He goes, "Yeah, could you, I just got this. I've never had one of these before. Could you just run me through it? Are you familiar with these?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I spent a couple of minutes just going through it. And then he's like, "Oh, okay, good. I'm good to go," and whatever. And I'm like, "All right," keeping one eye over there, and, I went off and shot my normal, couple of rounds that I shoot at that club with the rifle that I had there. And on the way out, I'd heard a couple of rounds as I was packing up, and on the way out, I'm walking past the bench that he's sitting at, and he's sitting there with the rifle on his lap, not on the bench, on his lap. And he looked like a little nervous, looked a little, I don't know how I'd describe it, looked like something just happened, and literally all the way around him, there was pieces of nylon, and literally he'd put a round through his backpack, and there was bits of nylon like everywhere from his backpack. And I was like, "Oh, this is not good. It's time to leave."
Yeah, public ranges are not my favorite place to be. Yeah. I will tell you a story. I don't want to, because he's actually a customer of ours. This is years ago. This is him saying as a hunter, he got his first AR hunting, and he had been a shooter his entire life. And for whatever reason, if you're not familiar with ARs, you're pulling them in and out of packs. You're pulling them in and out of bags. You're putting them away. You've got the safety lever. He shot himself in the foot. So a short-barreled AR, not 16 under, but a shorter version. Yeah. And when he brought the rifle down, they were pig hunting at night. And whatever got caught on, whether he caught his own finger or whatever, but the gun went bang, and he spent the next day in the emergency room. So, what I'm saying is the reason the ARs aren't on my list is for that reason. There's just a whole level of complexity, safety, training.
Short-barreled rifles or shorter-barreled carbines and then pistols, the ability to point them in the wrong direction is there. And people get in more trouble with those things than anything else. And, that is a consideration as well. I mean, we're very strict here about gun safety. We always bring it up. Jamie always brings it up because he's the lead instructor. But, you can't spend enough time reminding people that it's like a knife, right? There's a dangerous end and a not dangerous end, and you got to remind people about the dangerous end every minute of the day.
You do, and we're not Richard, how many ARs do you own?
2.
Yeah, and I do too. So we own them. We've carried them. We've shot them. We're not anti-AR, but what we're saying for new shooters is there is a whole another level to this, and you can really get yourself in harm's way. So you got that part. The other thing that wouldn't make my list is big magnums. So I like Richard's list when he was saying about 6.5 Creed, 308, those type of calibers, where you could get the recoil down and still have a nice shootable rifle. Because I am going to be honest with you, if you are a new shooter and you're getting the daylights kicked out of you, you're not learning anything. Or at least if you do, you're going to learn that this is really hard to do.
Yeah, it just makes it more. It makes it the whole thing harder. If your first rifle out the bag is a 308, obviously someone doesn't love you as much as they think they do, because that's a hard way to start unless you're used to, you're just not like I'm not particularly recoil adverse. I've pretty much shot everything that is a bolt gun, all the calibers up to the big stuff. And it doesn't worry me at all. I don't always enjoy it because I'm always striving for accuracy, and it's easier to get accuracy with a smaller cartridge. I think that's a general a general rule of thumb.
People will shoot them better.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So the last part I want to bring up with this, when you're selecting your rifle, maybe next week we'll dive into calibers a little bit more, because there's some things I want to talk a lot about with calibers, because we've had a lot of this conversation with customers here in the last couple months. People selecting hunting calibers and guides demanding certain things, and that guilt trip of what you read online and what everybody's posts. So we're going to post up our thoughts on caliber selection for hunting, caliber selection for learning.
Yep.
So think of like your long range training rifle compared to your hunting rifle. So that'll be maybe next week's podcast. Give Rich a little bit of heads up.
Yeah.
So what I would like to finish up with this and some final thoughts here is, when you're selecting your factory rifle, I'm not an anti-factory guy, and there are some truing techniques and things that you can do to clean them up. And we'll save that for another podcast and say, okay, now you got a good shooting factory rifle. What can you do to help get it shoot a little bit better? I'm going to take some time to share that stuff with you, because I think there's some value in that. But final thoughts is, you shoot and have to pick what you like. We don't want you to go out and buy stuff just off of our opinion. We're not influencers. We're just shooters that want to share an honest opinion with good intention. There's no link below to say, here, click here and buy this now and save 10% with our promo code. So, Richard, any final thoughts?
I honestly don't think you can go wrong with a Tikka. And if you get a Tikka that doesn't shoot, get someone else to shoot it. And then if they can't get it to shoot, just take it back and pick another one off the rack. Because they do have a guarantee for one MOA. And I know that the 243 I had was so consistent. So it was a fantastically consistent rifle. It had the lightweight pencil barrel on it. It was the Tupperware stock, and it just shot. I mean, for East Coast, 250-yard max, really, realistic, shooting on a deer, it was perfect. Super lightweight. It sounded like a Tupperware box when you tapped on the stock.
Yeah. Well, I think Tikka did a great job too. Like my first experience, same thing, T3 Light 243. It was my lightweight varmint rifle, and I loved it to pieces. It was like 10 years later, it went to my nephew. I cleaned it up a little bit. It didn't do a lot to it, but for what it was a great rifle. And we had some T3 tacticals when they first come through our shooting school, and they were just incredible shooting. One was in a 308, others were in 223s. But man, that 308 he took our Top Gun hat one year with 12 students in it. But we'll do some research and talk a little bit more about the next podcast. We'll dive into how we would choose our calibers for both hunting and for training. So what we would choose in those two. So one's going to be our match gun, and then we'll do one.
I just thought of something. Mm-hmm. We didn't really talk about what the frustrations are if you buy something like if you bought one of those super cheap $350 guns, if you can still get those off the rack, the super cheap end of the market. I think you run into guns that don't feed and guns that don't shoot and things that will just cause you frustration, and you'll
stocks that are only 2 steps above a rubber band.
Yeah,
I mean they flex and bow.
Yeah, too much flex, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like you can put some work into it to fix it.
And we talked about that, the YouTubes at 1,000 yards for $1,000, or the one guy built his custom rifle and put a $200 stock on a $250 paint job, and so you have to prioritize what you're going to spend your money on. I'd go with an all black, ugly stock and get the better rifle than.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
that's ridiculous.
So I guess the point that we wouldn't look at them. I mean, and not unless you absolutely had to, and that was what you had to purchase to go. I mean, if that's what you can buy and go out to do deer hunting and stuff, that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. But if what we're talking about is if you want to really get into precision shooting and you want to take and learn and grow as a better marksman, you sort of have to up your game on the factory side of it.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, if it gets to the point where you can't quite afford it, just don't do it. Like, hold off.
Yeah.
Spend another 6 months, go get a second job, as Jamie would always do, or a third job or a fourth job, whatever it is. Just hold off, and then you're better off just waiting a little bit. And then, and we haven't even started talking about scopes and such like. But
so
oh my goodness. Yeah.
There's an old saying, buy once, cry once. So a friend of mine told me years ago, he said, the only time you smile when you buy something cheap is when you write the check. The only time you don't smile when you save and buy something good is when you write the check.
That's right.
So, we're still talking factory guns that are reasonably priced here, but I'm with Richard. I would save a little bit more. Don't get too much of in a hurry. go in and just put money down and put one on layaway, whatever you have to do. But I think in the end, if you want to get into this, you'll thank yourself later. Your future self will.
And watch out for used scopes, because generally that means there's a problem with them.
Or used rifles. Like, unless it's my friends that I know is a hammer, I would never, me personally, buy used rifles. Nobody trades their favorite shooting rifle.
That's right.
Ever. So I would like to say thank you really quick to MDT. They're a proud sponsor of the show. They make a lot of great chassis, including the new JE 700, the new MDT ACC Elite, even right down to the new Oryx that's been out for a couple of years. We think for a sub $500 chassis, is probably one of the best chassis on the market.
Very robust, comfortable chassis.
Yeah, Richard's actually betted a couple now.
I've betted a couple of those now, yeah.
So lots of great chassis to look at, and it's a great upgrade for a factory rifle, which we're going to talk about in a future podcast here, things to look at, how to upgrade, and things to do. But if you want to learn more and you want to use a chassis and you want to look at all the great selections, you can stop over to mdttac.com. That's mdttac.com. And then real quick, we just want to give you an update on the online long-range shooting school. We are really humming away. We got lots of students signing up. We really appreciate it. We now have nearly 850 minutes of content, nearly 13 to 14 hours of instructional video posted, and it's on a monthly basis, so you can sign up, you can go through all the courses, go back and repeat any of the classes. So if you want to learn more about our new online long-range shooting school, which is basically our in-person school that you can take remotely from the convenience and comfort of your own home, you can learn more about that at wolfprecision.net. That's wolfprecision.net. So parting shots over the bow there, Mr. Richard. What are you thinking?
If you're thinking about buying a rifle, go buy one.
Ah, there we go.
And start learning how to shoot.
It might be a good time now because maybe the prices are coming down a little bit.
It is starting to become a lost art. You know, people don't learn how to shoot as a kid nowadays. And I think it's kind of cool. It's like hitting golf balls, right? Once you've learned how to do it, you can pretty much pick a club up and go hit golf balls and always play relatively well. Once you've learned the fundamentals, you can always apply them. And I'm a golfer that doesn't golf very much nowadays, but I used to golf to a good standard, and I can still get round a course in, around 80. And literally, I won't pick a golf club up for a couple of years, and I'll still shoot in the 80s.
Wow.
Just because of fundamentals. To keep the skill set, you have to use it, but once you know how to apply the fundamentals, you'll always shoot well.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to come back through. We're going to talk about caliber selections next week. I'll let Richard think about his list, and I'll think about mine. And then we're going to continue after that and talk about some gunsmithing things that you can do to upgrade your rifle once you have it and you know it shoots. So anything we talk about there, don't do until you actually make sure it's a decent shooting rifle. So, Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning on the podcast.
This was a lot of fun, and I do appreciate getting the heads up.
It was at 9 o'clock last night.
That was okay.
And Richard is bedding rifles like crazy. We're going to do a video on some switch barrel stuff as well. We're really trying to focus on, if you build a custom rifle, being able to swap out the barrels at home. We think there's huge value to that. And we've always done it. So even back to the very first Bat Tactical Action that we worked on in 2011, the head spacing was still less than 2 to 3 10,000ths, which is 3 times tighter than the current standards. And it was always designed so that way it didn't matter when the rifle was purchased from us or when we built it, we knew the headspace would work on anything we ever built. And so there's value to being able to switch out calibers from hunting to varmint hunting to precision shooting to completely changing your rifle from hunting to long range. So we're going to try to do some videos on some of the quick change barrel systems and how they work here at house too.
Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty interesting because, you can end up in a situation where you might want to go shoot some matches during the summer, and then towards the end of the summer you want to get your hunting rig together. And you can use the same rifle you've been practicing with and shooting in matches.
Yeah.
And in the olden days, we'd have one rifle and it would be probably a 308 and you'd shoot that for everything. Now it's easy enough to shoot a competition gun with a 6-dasher and then go hunting time. You can go from 6-dasher, you go to 243. If you're on the East Coast, that's perfect for shooting deer.
And I think for those that are buying custom, and we'll talk customs in another podcast, is being able to do that. I mean, it would be lovely to have 16 different custom rifles down the wall, but even we would look at it and be like, wow, that's a lot of rifles to learn to shoot, and that's a pile of money when we can just pop out the barrel. So I've always said there's huge value if you buy a really high quality rifle to be able to make it so it's not just a one-trick pony. You can change it up as your needs and wants change.
Oh, my goodness. This is going to be one heck of a podcast for next week, because then you start talking about, well, okay, I'll just have one scope.
That's huge.
Right. Or 2 scopes, like we were talking scopes the end of last year, I think, and we finally got the scope from Loophole that I've been waiting for. And I got that on that 223, and that thing is a fantastic hunting scope.
And we should do a video on how we switch scopes out. And
Yeah.
you can bounce scopes, and being able to have one scope and know it well and use it on the same rifle, not having to buy 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are ways you can really enjoy, and we've learned this the hard way.
Right.
I mean, people ask how many rifles we personally own, they're often shocked. It's not as many as what people think, but the rifles we have, we use, and the components, we just swap them around as any needs change. Well, Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on the podcast.
Yeah,
and we'll see you guys all next week. So if you enjoyed the podcast and you'd like to, we have a new thing on Patreon where you can stop over and support the show. It's $3 a month. We call it the Wolf Pack. You're more than welcome to do that. If you enjoyed the podcast and you want to share it, we really appreciate that as well. And also, if you like the podcast, if you don't mind leaving a nice comment or review, that really helps us a lot with the ratings. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us here on the podcast. We really appreciate it. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host, and you're listening to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.